Hello everyone and welcome. In today's video I'm going to be talking about what game I've decided to play for Halloween. First of all, it's not a Dungeons & Dragons game. Instead, I've chosen to give Kelsey Dion's Shadowdark a go. But there will be a twist. I'm not running it as a group adventure. That may come later, so watch this space. For the foreseeable future, I'm actually going to have a crack at SoloDark, the one-player accompaniment to the Shadowdark world. But before I start though, I want to dive into what makes Shadowdark, well, Shadowdark. For example, how the world works and how characters navigate it. What drew me to Shadowdark was the simplicity of play. I also really like the time pressure element of keeping light sources running in Shadowdark's total darkness. To give a quick overview of some of the rules and general mechanics, here are some things you can expect. So let's begin with your stuff, or basically what you're carrying. It just takes up a slot. You don't have to calculate weight. Difficult to carry items just take up more than one slot. Distance is divided into 3 categories: close, 5 foot of movement; near, 30 foot of movement; and far, which is the maximum distance away from something without losing sight of it. With spellcasting, if a player rolls too low and the spell fails to cast, that's it. They can't cast that spell again until they've had a rest. If they're a wizard and critically fail, or roll a natural 1, they also need to visit the wizard mishap table to see what the consequences are. An example of a wizard mishap for a tier 1 spell is Energy Surge. When a wizard experiences an energy surge, they burn bright purple, giving their opponents an advantage on all attack rolls. Not ideal, and this could result in a severe loss of HP or even death. Speaking of which, death is also very real in the Shadowdark world, and when a character has 0 hit points or HP, they are unconscious and dying. During this state, a player rolls a d4 and adds their constitution modifier to it. This gives the number of rounds they can survive, if they're unable to break out of that state. For example, by being healed or stabilised. So let's say they roll a 2 and their constitution modifier is +2. They've got 4 rounds left to receive healing. While on 0 HP, the player can roll a d20 when it's their turn. If they roll a natural 20, they regain consciousness and 1 hit point. That's the ideal outcome. Another player can also stabilise their fallen friend by making a successful intelligence check of 15. However, this only stops their friend from dying. They are still very much unconscious. Non-magical healing occurs during an 8-hour rest plus 1 ration. When players take an 8-hour rest without rations, they get some spells back and some magical items may regain their effects, but they won't gain any HP back. And not forgetting, after a rest, some talents may also return. Talents are very useful and some can add bonuses to attack and damage rolls. Another way of thinking about talents is that they are special abilities that give a character some form of benefit. Oh, before I forget, there are no short rests in Shadowdark. It's 8 hours or nothing. But what if they encounter a stressful interruption? They need to make a DC 12 constitution check. If they roll a 12 or higher, they pass and get all the benefits of that full rest. If they fail, they gain no benefit from resting, even after consuming a ration. However, sleep can be broken for light tasks, such as keeping watch or stoking a fire. This brings me on to my next point, light. So in Shadowdark, no player characters have dark vision, so keeping that fire burning can be the difference between life and death. Without a light source, characters will be coming up against darkness-adapted beings who can see them very clearly. So when striking up a match to light a torch or fire, the GM should set a timer for 1 hour or 60 minutes in real time. Another thing to consider is that time passes at the same rate in Shadowdark as in real life. Obviously, you don't need to account for every moment in real time. For example, during an 8-hour rest, you don't need to sit for 8 hours waiting for the time to pass. Likewise, when players want to examine the room for 10 minutes, this doesn't have to take a literal 10 minutes. However, Kelsey notes that if you can't keep track of real time, a good rule of thumb is that 1 hour equals 10 rounds. Right, so back to the darkness. Without a light source, players are in total darkness. So naturally, any task requiring sight is at disadvantage. During total darkness, the GM rolls for a random encounter every crawling round. A crawling round is when all players do something during their turn. To clarify, a crawling round has nothing to do with combat. These rounds are explorative, and during them, players interact with their environment. For example, talking to NPCs and generally engaging with something. Like a combat round, everyone rolls a d20 and adds their dexterity modifier to decide the order of the crawl. The person with the highest result goes first, followed by everyone else in a clockwise fashion. If anyone encounters a foe during a crawl round, they begin to engage in combat. With melee, the strength modifier and any talent bonuses are added to the attack rolls. A hit occurs if the total is equal to or greater than the opponent's AC, or armor class. Also, before I forget, there are no dual-wielding weapons in Shadowdark. For ranged weapon attacks, it's the same, except the dexterity, not the strength modifier, is added to the attack roll. But what happens if a player rolls a crit? If a player is lucky enough to roll a natural 20, the damage dice total is doubled. For spells, a player can double one of the numerical effects. For example, if the spell's damage is 3d8, the result of that roll is doubled. Something else to consider is that just because players are battle hardened, it does not necessarily mean they are flush with XP. In Shadowdark, treasure, boons, and a dash of clever thinking are linked to XP. Let's take the boon example. Not all boons are equal, and some carry more XP than others. The types of boons in Shadowdark are oaths, secrets, and blessings. So let's say a person receives a blessing from a god. This is a very valuable boon that carries a lot of XP. Treasure, however, is the main driving force of character advancement, or XP, as it provides players with direct resources and motivation to delve deeper within Shadowdark, which, let's be honest, is the point of the game. Treasure is rated from poor to legendary, with poor treasure carrying a meagre 0 XP and legendary treasure carrying 10 XP. In terms of how much treasure players can expect to find, it's sometimes easier to relate this to their level. For example, a find worth 20 gold pieces should be straightforward for players between levels 0 to 3, 50 gold pieces levels 4 to 6, and finally 80 gold pieces levels 7 to 9. Kelsey also gives some helpful examples of what to expect from these treasure ratings. For instance, poor treasure is a bag of silver or a used dagger. At the opposite end of the scale, legendary treasure could be a dragon's hoard. But how does a GM award treasure? Unsurprisingly, there are lots of ways to bake treasure into the game. Monsters, for example, have a 50% chance of carrying some treasure, so an opportunity to loot a fallen foe should never be turned down. The GM decides the type of treasure a monster is carrying by using the treasure tables. A level 2 monster, for example, would fall into the treasure 0 to 3 table. Next, the GM rolls a d100 to determine what the monster is carrying. So let's say a GM rolls a 29. With this outcome, the players remove leather armour dyed back from the monster, which is worth 10 gold pieces. Of course, if the treasure does not align with the monster, re-roll the d100. The GM can also randomly generate unguarded treasure using treasure tables, and they choose a table based on the character's level. For example, if a level 6 wizard finds a treasure chest, they would use a 4 to 6 treasure table to determine what gems and other artefacts are inside. Speaking of gems, a pearl is worth 40 gold pieces, and this sits within the 4 to 6 table. However, an emerald is worth 120 gold pieces, and this can be found in the 7 to 9 table. So as you can see, treasure finds go up in value as players level up. Hopefully this will shed some light on how each treasure chest can differ in its contents depending on the character who finds it. Right, so that's a whistle-stop tour of how to play Shadowdark. I haven't got into character creation, as that will likely overlap with my solo game. If you're interested in games that lean into darkness and horror, I've got another video where I examine Strahd von Zarovich, D&D's most famous and despised vampire. He sees himself as a tragic hero, a victim of circumstance. Of course, in his opinion, he never did anything wrong, not intentionally. But I take you through his story arc and outline the hallmarks of villain structure to show how he conforms to them. That's all for today, folks, and I'll see you in the next one.